Three, two, one.
Okay.
Hello, hello, everybody. Yes, we are in the
Hola.
USA and we are in Hawaii, actually, for this great marathon. Thank you to Alan, Shelton. Thank you for your time. And I know it's Thanksgiving now, but and for all your generosity. May I introduce you? We are with Alan Shelton, but I love it because in Spanish you are known as abuelo, which is grandfather,
Sí.
and I love this. Abuelo is a very
Así
nice
es.
title here.
As-
Actually, the white
Así es.
person
Así
here
es.
are called abuelo sometimes, and abuela. And you are, you were maybe leadership teacher in the corporate world, which is quite
Correct.
amazing. And at the same time, a spiritual teacher for seekers and
Yep.
very good as storyteller. I know that. I know that. I
Yeah.
don't want my
Yeah.
cat to switch off the computer. So please, do you want to tell us a little bit more about you and then we go to the questions?
Sure. Sure.
Go
I
ahead. Thank
was,
you so much.
you're welcome. I'm one of those children that was raised in California in the 1960s, which was a big time with things happening and everything. And so my idea of education, I got more education outside of school, I think, than inside of school, just because of the times. So of course, after a few years, I ended up in the corporate world. I wanted to be a philosophy professor, but they had no jobs. So they
Oh,
came to me and
oh, oh.
they said, "Oh, you're brilliant in philosophy, but we have no work for philosophers, but you could go be a corporate man." And I said, "Okay, so why not?" And so I went to the corporate world and became a philosopher in the corporate world. So,
You managed.
yeah. When I was young, I lived in Peru and South America, and learned to speak Spanish and learned a lot about the storytelling tradition up in the Andes. From the shamans, the Aymara and Quechua shamans, who were very, very sweet about explaining to a young man. I was only 20 years old, and they explained to
Don't
me,
tell me 20 years old.
20 years old, yeah, and they would tell me
Oh
how
my
stories work, right?
God.
They would say, well, they would tell me how the stories would come from the sky and how you held them and how you told them and how an amazing time. So
Wow.
I beautiful time. And then I began to see that the maturity in the corporate world, the leadership world, that they didn't have that. It was the same thing I'd learned in Peru and learned from all my teachers. So I began to teach that. I spent years in India with the masters in India, and so today I work with people who are in their spiritual search. That's the world I live in, which is a world of knowing yourself. That's the world I live in. So
Actually, that's the word of what education should be.
yes,
First, education should
yes.
be to know ourselves and then help the world and do service and whatever. What are your views on how will be the new education after all this year, 2020? What would you see in the future? How can we can co-create a beautiful education? We do need to change, don't we?
I think so. Probably I think one of my heroes in education is a man that you probably know. He's passed some years back, but his name is Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell was this beautiful man who decided that his life was going to be about understanding all of the ancient myths, the ancient stories. Now, of course, there wasn't anybody in the university or educational system that wanted to hear about that. They had no place for him. So
Oh,
he went to this little college in the U.S. called Sarah Lawrence, and they gave him the basement down in the bottom of the building. They gave him this little basement, and he created, in essence, the whole world of mythology and story, and how to understand story, and how that was a part of the
beautiful.
spiritual process. So to me, when I look at how to work in education, I really feel like that understanding the basics of story and letting children actually sit in the story. In other words, we try to give them, spreadsheets and theories and concepts, and the reality is all of that comes from story. The first thing is story. We don't let them stay there. We want to let them stay in the stories and learn about story first. That's the first thing I would do. And I would introduce the ancient wisdom, not the modern educational techniques, but what's the ancient wisdom? How for thousands of years we have wisdom in our entire humanity. So why aren't we using that wisdom? So to me, those would be the things that I would do: story and wisdom. Those are the two things that I think that education could use. And the kids love it. The children love it. When I tell stories with children, oh my goodness, it's such a happy moment. You know, it's the kids will tell stories and listen to stories. They'll spend hours with you. They don't care if you're an adult. If you're telling stories, you're not an adult any longer. You're just one of them, right? It's beautiful.
Dad wants to be in the picture.
Yeah.
What is the process? How come stories are such a good pedagogical tool? How can you decode why it works so much and all the time? I mean, systematically at old age and old culture.
It's because the very basic of what you and I call cognition. Yeah. So what is cognition, right? Cognition is sitting in the world that we live in, right? And we look out there and we learn from very little, a very small child, how do you take something out of everything we see? So I can look at you right now and I can say, oh my goodness, look, there's this beautiful cat. I have to pull the cat out, right, in my mind, and then I can tell a story about the cat. There you go. So there's a story waiting to happen, right? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I see. I've got Naomi and I've got QM3000 and all this stuff, but I'm going to tell a story about the cat. So I have to take the cat out and put it in my story. So the basic way that humans process, they cognize, and once they cognize, they place it in a story. That's the first thing we learn. Always, every concept, every scientific theory, everything is around story. Let me tell you a fun story. Let me tell you a fun one. You'll like this.
Please.
So, yeah. So all the scientists went out and they figured out the master physicists of the world. This is just a few years ago. And they figured out there was something wrong with how they had figured out that the moon was created, the Earth's moon. They said they had new data and they couldn't figure it out, right? So all of these masters, they got all this data, and finally they said to each other, let's go have a meeting. Now they had the meeting in Hawaii, in Kona, in a city called Kona, Hawaii, right? And why did they meet? They came to basically put the story together because they said with all of the data, if there's no story, how will anybody ever know that we have discovered something new? So the greatest scientists in the world flew to Hawaii to basically create a story.
Wow.
So when you think about it, what's at the bottom? It's got to be the story. If I can't tell you a story, you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's just the nature of story. And that's why it's so important.
Because if it is a story, you never forget. If
That's
it is
correct.
a data, it will go to the left brain and forget. The right brain will capture and keep the memories. It's a long-term memory. And that was a secret of all the traditions.
No, even this, here's the thing. When I tell a story, here's the thing that I learned in the Andes, right? The shamans would tell me, they would say, Alan, never forget how you feel in the moment of a story, because you can always go back to how you feel and the story will come again. The story will always come from the original place. And so stories live in a certain way. The library of stories are pre-verbal. They live before words, and you can always go back to the pre-verbal library, pull the book off the shelf, open it up and go, oh, that's how I felt. When I tell stories today, they come out different every time, but they're from exactly the same place, right? A great storyteller never tells the stories the same way every time. We all know that. They're different every time, right? But from the same place, from the same exact moment they tell their story. Storytellers go live. They go live in the place the story came from, and then they just speak. And that's how stories are told.
Yesterday, I was talking with a Mamo from Sierra Nevada, from Colombia, and I asked him how far away the memory of these people is Kogi, Arwako, will go back in time.
Yep.
And to my great surprise, you know what he said? I have the exact figure here. He said, can you guess? what he said?
Oh, 10,000 years.
He said more than 3 million years, and he said the
Oh, of course.
exact number. And that is, and for us, 2,000 years is 2 nights and 2 days.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how can they remember all that? How are those people, and the same with Australia, how can they remember? Because of the stories. If not, there is no way to remember such a long span of time with all the
and
details.
when they gather, they establish the same moment, right? So when you go talk to the Hindu wise men in India, and you'll say, how many years ago? They'll go, oh, that was 100,000 years ago. And you'll ask them why, and they'll tell you where the stars were in the sky. And if you go look it up, it's exactly 100,000 years ago. The story is that in the gathering, they established the moment, and those moments live. It's called the oral tradition. That's another thing that we've given away. The oral tradition no longer exists because we believe that writing something down captures it, but it doesn't.
It doesn't.
Writing does not. It does not do that. And just to be able to know that, the world will change not out of our intellect. It will never happen. The intellect by nature seeks to separate, because its very nature is to separate one thing from another. That's what cognition does. But before cognition, everything is one thing. And that's where love lives. Love lives before separation. And so trying to change the world from the mind will never happen. Not going to happen.
That's why connect mind and heart and hands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I have another question. If you master time, you master the cycles. And many
Correct.
traditions are talking about the new cycle. I mean, the end of one cycle, of several cycles actually, and to the new one.
Yep.
Do you have any stories or any input on the new cycle from the tradition?
Well, it's obvious that, as you know, I mean, the pendulum swings from one end to the other. So if you look at where we are today, you can see that we have swung into a world of incredible separation. We worship the digital platform, right? But the digital platform is a platform of separation. It's data separation. So people have begun to, if you look in the United States particularly, people are very, very divided in the United States. And I think a lot of that is because of the digital world. Basically, its very nature is to divide things. So to me, when you look at how the pendulum is swung, it by nature, the new epoch, the new era is going to have to pull it back. Now I don't know if you would call that evolution or not. I'm not a big evolution guy, because I actually believe that divinity itself lives in one place, and it doesn't pay any attention to time or space. So there isn't any up or down in the world of divine, but it pulls the world back towards it when it gets too far away. And I think that the next era is one of magnetization of consciousness. So that's that's where I think we're going. Now, when you listen to the ancient tribes, they've been telling us that for years, right? You can call the shamans in the Andes anytime, and they'll go, well, we've been saying that for hundreds of years, right? So they're a little ahead of us, these guys.
But it's beautiful. Magnetization.
Yeah.
How did you say of consciousness? Magnetization.
Magnetization. It's a hard word.
Magnetization of consciousness.
It's like in Spanish, there's a word, distribuir. I can never say this word, right? It's impossible to say in Spanish. Magnetization is an impossible word to say in English, so it's okay.
Thank you to save me. What would you tell the teachers and parents who are looking at us? What will be your message right now for them?
My message would be that the birthright of who you are lives in your own childhood. And the way to teach and lead in our future is to go back to your childhood and harvest the lessons of that time, to learn how to tell a story, to learn how to be innocent, to learn how not to know, to learn how to imagine, to learn all of the things. Because when I taught in the corporate world, that's all I did was I taught people how to go back and be children again. That was where the great wisdom came from. So my message to the world is not to worry about teaching the children outside of you. Worry about teaching the children inside of you. And if you teach the children inside of you, the children on the outside will be taught. That would be my message.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think what you do is so important. We
Thank you.
invite you and all the elders and abuelos and abuelas and all the people for a next marathon, and it will be on oral tradition and only story. We can have stories for 24 hours in a row. What do you think?
Perfecto, that's perfect. Al fin quiero decir unas palabras en español, castellano,
Por favor.
digamos. Por favor. Quiero decir que tenemos que retener la energía de hablar en castellano porque lleva el amor. Es una cosa emocional y lleva un amor tan magnífico. Y cuando yo quiero estar en mi corazón, hablo castellano. Y siempre me encanta poder hablar y hacer unas palabras en español. Gracias.
Haremos, definitivamente. Y as always, everybody's invited to the Sun Island too. We will do many events when we can fly.
Okay.
Pretty soon.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much. You take care, and definitely we keep in touch. Okay, abuelo, mi corazón. You are in my corazón. Take care, and thank you so much for your time.
Okay, perfect.